See, I heard people telling me I played hardcore. I didn't know what the fuck hardcore was. I never even said hardcore in my life. I always thought hardcore was porno, like XXX or whatever.
To a lot of people, hardcore punk music just sounds like 100 cement mixers in an auditorium. It sounds like a swarm of killer bees moving back and forth in front of the mouthpiece of a megaphone. It sounds like toddlers banging pots and pans together. To most people, hardcore music just sounds like noise. And yeah, it's not hard to understand why. It's abrasive, it's dissonant, it's absurdly loud. And yet, people flock to hear this noise and respond with a kind of passion I think few music listeners can really comprehend. I mean, look at these goobers, flailing and jumping around like goobers. What is it about this music that possesses people to embarrass themselves like this? Well, contrary to what the uninitiated might assume, there is poetry and supreme musicality to be found in hardcore music. It isn't chaos for chaos's sake. If you meet it halfway, there's incredible humanity hiding in its animalistic frenzy. It's music full of contradictions, harmony and aggression, simplicity and extremity, beauty and ugliness. And this is a video about Jeremy Saulnier's Green Room, about how it so effortlessly channels those contradictions and captures the spirit of hardcore music like no other film I've seen.
You know, everybody was so fed up with what was going on with rock and roll, which was Deep Purple. These big bloated concerts where they do these organ solos for 20 minutes or these guitar solos for 20 minutes.
What you got in hardcore is the bad brains starting out playing punk rock and getting faster for some reason. If the drummer's bored, Earl, he want to go talk to a girl, he might play the songs all fast. I might be on stage looking at him like, dude, you pissing me off, man, come on. And next thing you know, it create like a genre, you know what I mean? Like the speed.
Hardcore punk's greatest virtue, for my money, is brevity. Short, punchy, but effective songwriting. Hardcore doesn't typically labour the point. It gets right to the point, and proceeds to curb stomp the point before moving on. In the same spirit, director Jeremy Saulnier doesn't waste a moment of our time. Green Room's dramatic success lies in its lean exposition, distilled character work, and masterful control of tension with carefully spaced dramatic peaks and valleys. It takes a mere 17 minutes to get into the meat of the action, and not a second of setup time is wasted. Comparing Green Room to its two main influences from film history, John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13 and Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs, we see that Saulnier has used them as a template for story structure, but tightened the screws and sharpened the edges a bit. Precinct 13 takes 40 minutes to get to the siege itself, and Straw Dogs, bless its heart, takes an hour and 20 minutes. These are both classic siege movies, attempting very different things. But it's notable nonetheless that Green Room owes such a debt to them while still managing to strip away most of the fat without sacrificing tone, pacing or clarity. A line here or a gesture there is all Saulnier needs to give his characters shape and later dimension when these lines and gestures pay off in variously important ways. Take this early scene with Reese. From this scene we know this guy is a live wire and willing and able to fuck someone up if need be.
Just round up.
Christ.
Easy there, jiu-jitsu.
We learn this is much more than empty intimidation when later Reese's background in martial arts becomes absolutely indispensable. Or this small exchange which foreshadows Emily and Daniel's eventual betrayal.
If your girl's gonna be catching,
Don't mention that.
okay, I was just
No worries whatsoever, just shut the fuck up about him and me and her.
So much exposition is threaded almost invisibly into the dialogue in this way, really rewarding repeat viewing. The script goes to incredible lengths to leave no loose ends and ensure every Chekhov's gun is accounted for. See this shotgun? Wondering if it'll come into play later? Well, wonder no more. See this gated driveway? Well, here we are again. See this suspicious looking heroin? What do you know, it's poison. Oh, Sam has a smartphone. That phone being the only concession the band makes to modernity and their only link to the outside world. Wouldn't it be funny if it were the incidental catalyst for their downfall? Set up and pay off. Set up, pay off. It's a really simple formula, but you'd be surprised how many major films fail to follow it. In the case of Green Room, the miracle is that Jeremy Saulnier's obsessive attention to detail and heavy use of foreshadowing doesn't weigh the film down at all. It has a running time of about 95 minutes, and that feels just right. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and that's important. Like the character Pat himself explains,
it's time and aggression.
Technical wizardry.
And it's shared live. And then it's over.
And all of a sudden, fuck this has a backbeat. You know, what John Lennon always said, say what you mean what you say, put a beat to it. Go.
Another thing Saulnier nails is the authentic depiction of hardcore kids.
Let me go back to my aggro days, back in the hardcore punk scene, and make a film that I thought would be perfect for myself when I was 18, 19 years old, like making movies in my backyard with my friends and going to punk shows.
Punks in media are too often depicted as scenesters without substance or believability. Just weirdos with mohawks, Doc Martens and loose anarchist affiliations. Green Room bucks that trend by delivering 4 slightly pretentious but utterly believable characters in the form of the Ain't Rights, who crucially dress like normal people. I mean, the loudest fashion choice here is Tiger's green hair, but there's no safety pins or bondage pants in sight. And like typical young artists, the Ain't Rights are so desperate for identity and notability that they can come off a little grating at times.
You guys are hard to find. Why no social media presence?
That's because booking more shows, selling more records would blow.
It's not hard rock.
No one wants to starve, but when you take it all virtual, you lose the texture.
After all, these are kids allowing their identities to become so wrapped up in their musical manifesto, their insistence on living off the grid, rejecting social networking and glorifying the live experience, that they can't even admit to themselves or others that they listen to Prince or Madonna or CCR until they're faced with a life-threatening scenario which brings the truth to the surface.
Simon and Garfunkel. Desert Island Band.
Prince.
When you're young and finding your voice creatively or simply developing a musical palette, it's tempting to latch on to the first genre or scene that speaks to you and allow it to define you entirely.
Well, I'm a punk now, all right?
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I'm angry.
Oh, yeah, what are you angry about?
About stuff.
What stuff?
All the stuff.
I'm a metalhead. I'm a hardcore kid. A juggalo. An emo or a jazz guy. It's almost a rite of passage for adolescent minds, but you soon realise there's no virtue in liking one kind of music. It's self-limiting, and typically people with such narrow frames of reference don't make good music themselves. But it is comforting to be a part of an in-crowd. You get this cosy sense of inclusion and even authority. Getting to play gatekeeper to a culture is a power trip of a sort. You call out posers and pontificate on what is and isn't true punk.
This dude's legit.
What, because he wakes up at 5 in the morning to put jizz in his hair?
He's true.
The scrappy authenticity of the Ain't Rights is also really important from a plot perspective. Green Room puts its hardcore kids in a horrible situation in which they are uniquely capable of making somewhat informed decisions. I don't buy into the reading of the film which describes the characters as idiots making one avoidable mistake after another. On the contrary, I'd argue that Sam, Pat, Reese and Tiger are a little sharper and more daring than your average horror protagonists. And as punks at a punk show, they're hardly fish out of water. I mean, sure, they take some dumb risks and seize opportunities a little overzealously, but importantly, they are never overtaken by paralysis or hysteria. They very quickly comprehend the severity of their situation, and in spite of stumbling in their escape efforts, they are not imbeciles merely for the sake of plot convenience. Indeed, we gather from this exchange that they have encountered chapters of neo-Nazis in the past.
Just so you know, it's mostly boots and braces down there.
Skins is some at every shop.
What, DMS, Sharp?
Right wing, or technically ultra left, but not affiliated.
Oh, and now that we've broached the subject of neo-Nazis proper, it's something I should really touch on.
Are you a Nazi? Nine! I mean, no, of course not. I'm simply an alternative, pan-European, ethno-nationalist identitarian with some socialist leanings.
Oh, well in that case, get your ass on in here. Pull up a seat.
Adanka.
When I was in the hardcore scene in DC back in the 1990s, there were actually Nazi skinheads at every show, just about. I mean, this is like odd for a 16-year-old to go across the bridge from Alexandria, Virginia into DC and see Nazis in broad daylight at a matinee show.
That shit happened to me in England. The kid was playing in England. He said, "You fucking Yankee nigga, go home." Spit on me and shit. I jumped down, punched him in the face.
In hardcore and punk scenes, there is always this underlying tension, a niggling knowledge that for some, this music is infused with hardline agendas that go beyond a mere straight-edge culture or militant veganism. For some people, the shaved heads aren't just a hairstyle, they're a lifestyle that involves hating black people and Jews and gays and gypsies, I think. Saulnier very wisely doesn't get bogged down in the ideology of these skinheads, which is not to say he entirely skirts the subject. Helped by extensive research into skinhead culture, he quite tastefully uses politics as background texture to make it clear who we're dealing with, but by the same token, he never allows his antagonists to be monstrous caricatures like elsewhere in media. Among their ranks, we see lost kids harbouring deep resentment issues, subordinates in way over their head,
I want to go to jail.
traitors to the cause in a star-crossed love triangle, calculating demagogues with entirely apolitical economic concerns.
This might cost you your livelihood, Clark. As long as it doesn't cost me mine, you're covered.
There is a persistent thematic thread about youthful naivete being weaponized for nefarious purposes by men with power. In the same way the pit bulls are made to kill to gratify their master, trained to respond to German commands knowing not what they do, these angry disenfranchised kids are manipulated with racist rhetoric and used as cannon fodder to throw at problems facing Darcy's business. The film recognises the essential tragedy of this state of affairs in the haunting image of this injured pit bull wandering into the woods only to find its way back to its master to die alongside him. It's hard to avoid pondering the double meaning of the term dog whistle in this context. Ultimately, Saulnier's neo-Nazis are a truly intimidating antagonistic force, but the film doesn't want us to forget that they can be just as clumsy, just as scared, and just as human as our protagonists.
It's funny. You were so scary at night.
What would happen if I took the horror of Alice Cooper but made it about real things that happen to people? Instead of vampires and monsters, police brutality.
Hardcore music, and in particular its more extreme offshoots like grindcore and power violence, are infamous for horrific imagery, for a preoccupation with gore and violence and the worst humanity has to offer. Much like Jello Biafra's creative vision for Dead Kennedys, Green Room takes recognisable horror tropes and grounds them in a real-world threat. And though tremendously confronting at times, the film is peppered with jet black comedy. This approach to violent subject matter carries over from Saulnier's sophomore effort, Blue Ruin, where revenge film tropes were deconstructed with frequently messy results. Scenes of violence often playing out in a kind of tragic, ultra-violent slapstick. I should mention that some have resisted the horror label when discussing Green Room, opting instead to call it a thriller, which I understand, but in my estimation, Green Room transcends being merely thrilling and becomes truly horrifying. Granted, there's nothing supernatural going on, but the film plays on well-established fears, revulsions, and of course, terror of the unknown. Putting blood and gore aside, it beautifully taps into the wrong place, wrong time fear that I think we all share to one degree or another. It's the very same fear at the psychological core of home invasion movies, one of the more popular horror subgenres in recent years. The fear that through no fault of your own, you might cross paths with someone who means to do you harm, and no matter what you say or do will not be swayed by reason or inclined towards mercy. They just want to hurt you and that's that. Because after all, you're in their way, or you have something they want, or maybe they just feel like ruining your day. There's a debt owed to the likes of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Last House on the Left, insofar as Saulnier focuses in on man's inhumanity to man with a vaguely cold, detached lens and a stripped-down aesthetic. The horrors shown on screen aren't softened by a filter of Hollywood sentimentality or exaggeration. The violence here has a real impact because, by and large, it is done with no joy or stylistic flourish. The violence here is blind and flailing, not necessarily motivated by evil or even passion, but something purer and more primitive.
I treat the violence with a certain amount of reverence. For me, it's not just the violence that I'm attracted to, it's really the heightened stakes, and it is the intensity of the film.
So let's talk about that scene. The scene. The one that sticks with you long after you leave the cinema. It's fairly obvious why it's so effective. What you don't see is more powerful than what you do, the makeup and gore effects are outstanding, and Anton Yelchin's performance truly sells the shock and unimaginable pain of the experience. This explosion of violence brings the reality of the band's situation so suddenly and sharply into focus.
Put it up! Holy fuck. Yo, help me move the couch! Help me move it!
This'll be over soon, gentlemen.
But it doesn't stop there. The band can no longer be purely reactive, they have to be proactive, and so two separate, quieter and more measured acts of violence quickly follow, an ineffectual chokehold that gives way to an all too effective disembowelment. These simultaneously manage to de-escalate the tension but heighten the horror. There's something especially chilling about the resignation of these two acts of violence, in contrast with the panicked frenzy of the previous altercation in the doorframe. Really a perfect scene if ever there was one, recognising the gravity of the violence being done and, moreover, its import for the characters and story. And now let's take another look at Darcy's death scene. It's a scene made powerful by its inelegance, its over before you know it banality. There's no grace or honour in it, it's not a Mexican standoff in a spaghetti western. It's just a grim culmination of the character's choices up to this point, with a healthy dose of dumb luck. Like every other scene of violence, it features careful escalation building to a point of unbearable tension where the payoff is sudden and inglorious and messy and, much like a good hardcore song, unpredictable, brief and primal. Saulnier is clearly aware of the sheer onslaught of bad vibes he's put the audience through and grants us a reprieve and lets us leave the cinema with a scrap of satisfaction at least. We are offered some absurd semblance of a balance restored, or a warped version of justice where violence begets violence one last time in a morbid parody of a happy ending. While it's far from a ride into the sunset, it's something, anything to hold on to. For me, it evokes that feeling somewhere between emptiness and catharsis at the end of a cramped basement show. You just spent 60 minutes or more flailing around like a maniac working out all your rage and aggression, and now you have to reintegrate into society and go to work and wear a suit or tenderly kiss your wife when maybe you'd rather just slam your skulls together. A part of you gets left in that venue. A part of you maybe didn't know existed. It's possible I'm describing an experience completely unique to me, but I very much doubt that. I am, however, aware that there may be some folly in equating the trauma these characters go through to live music. But the character of Pat does achieve some comparable self-actualization. He finds himself stronger and more capable than he could possibly have imagined, and even gains some kind of perverse clarity. Pat is finally able to name his desert island band, and it only took a small ground war against neo-Nazis to open him up. There's a single moment in this film that really sums up why I love it so damn much. It's simple and in the scheme of things, insignificant. During the Ain't Right set, as they transition into playing their older, heavier stuff, time slows and the noise of the venue fades away, replaced by gentle ambient synth tones. Slam dancing, moshing, an activity many might consider idiotic or brutish, is, for a moment, through Saulnier's lens, balletic, graceful, serene. Those of us who can comfortably drift off with power violence or death grind blaring through our headphones understand this very well, but the average viewer might not. And Saulnier, aware of this, stops the cement mixers turning, stops the killer bees buzzing, and supplants them with something more universally pleasant to the ear. The audience is made to comprehend how it feels to love this music, to risk permanent hearing damage in order to truly feel present and alive, to get amongst the fleshy, thumping grinder of the pit, and be somehow at peace. With this seemingly unimportant 10-second interlude, Saulnier does a better job of translating the spirit of hardcore for a mainstream audience than any other filmmaker I'm aware of. Discovering Green Room did for me exactly what discovering hardcore music did. It shook me out of my apathy like a rush of blood to the head. Apart from being a taut, heart-pounding, near-flawless piece of storytelling, Green Room is also a love letter to a culture. And I cannot wait to see what Jeremy Saulnier does next.